So we've just closed out ARCHICATCHUP June 2023. In this video, you'll see the recap from our webinar, the interactive webinar we held earlier today, where we talked about existing context and bringing buildings in from previous projects when you might be using a different template and using different methodologies to do so. We talked about ways in which you incorporate ISO 19650 container naming in Archicad in your layout book specifically, and the ways in which you can get that naming convention across on your layout sheets and in your publishing sets. And we also talked about the release of Archicad 27 and some of my initial thoughts off the back of Graphisoft's Building Together event that they ran last Thursday. So now on with the show. The key thing with this topic is we were working on projects that were on school sites, and these schools were being master planned, and some of these schools had 10 stages to them. So we're talking about using and taking projects that were from old templates that had different setups in place, and you know how far Archicad moves in 10 years and how many releases things go through. So it wasn't as simple as just moduling in your old work. So what we did was we did a series of experiments to identify ways in which we could bring in the existing buildings on a site. In this instance, it was a school site, to be able to see what those existing buildings had, in terms of how those existing buildings were going to interact with the new build. And some of them were going to be immediately adjacent, and others were a little bit further away. Now, as I said, there's several ways in which that can be done. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to switch over my screens to this one here. Okay, so in this one, we don't actually have a school site or a school building, but it's more of a simple build to show you some of the key issues that we have. So we'll have our site. We have a texture on our site. We have a texture on our stonework here, and we have a texture on our roof. Now, this was built in my template that I'm currently using right now as part of my practice, but there's a couple of ways in which we can export this out. So the first approach we might want to do is, okay, we want to module it. So if we were going to module it, I won't demonstrate in this exact instance today because of the time constraints, but everyone will be well and truly aware that if we module this in to another project, there is the potential where we are using a composite, and I strongly suggest watching Scott Moore's presentation that's now up on my YouTube channel with regards to how attributes between separate files can get messed up. You can see quite quickly how some of these things like that can go awry in terms of if composites have separate index numbers. And because of the years between the stages, we're going to see situations as well where there's going to be some problems. So the first thing we want to try and experiment with, and what I'll do is I'll go back in here and I'll select all. And what we're going to do is we're going to file save as an object. So we could potentially bring in our existing building as an object. Okay, so let's do that. And I'm not going to say, basically the process of saving the object, what we would do is it would end up in our embedded library. So we save it off as a specific name. It'll become part of our embedded library. And then from that position as an embedded library object, which I'm not going to resave, we can then place it. So we'll come up into our library and our GDL house here, and we'll just drop this up on our Archicad layer. I'll just put that on there. We won't line them up specifically. Now, the reason why it's come in like that is because of my surface override. which has been set up, which I will turn off. But as you can see here, because it's a GDL object in the same project, it's come in perfect, which is great if you've got the same template and you've got all the same surfaces, all the same attributes working all the way through. So what we'll do now is we'll jump quickly over into an untitled project or a clean project. What we'll do is we'll go into my library and we will embed, and I don't like using this word, but because I don't want to set up a whole folder structure, what we're going to do is add a new, we're going to add this in here. So we've added that, reload. And then what we'll do is we'll go into our object. Now, once again, this is just in a fresh template. So just imagine this could be your template that you've used a few years later on down the track. And the first thing that we're going to see is some interesting challenges whereby that's placed. Look at how all of the finishes are wrong. So automatically, we've been fortunate that the grass has picked up the grass, but all of the other issues that have come across have been, they haven't mapped up correctly, because GDL objects call out specific index numbers. Now, the positive is there has been some development and movement in the idea of GDL since its inception in terms of how this would function and work. So you can map to all these different things. And when we save the object off, there is the ability to give these names. Now, that's not my ideal approach. It doesn't work as well as we really want it to. But now what we're going to do is we'll go back across to our other file. We'll just delete this off to the side. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to go up to File, and we're going to Save As, and I'll drag this across. We're going to save this as a SketchUp file. Now, I've already got one of these saved, but what we'll do is we'll just give this a separate name. So, see here, all of this is working, and we go, okay. Now, when these become big files, they become quite a challenge to open and bring in. Now, what we want to do is we're going to go back to our untitled, and we're going to go back to our ground floor. And the other challenge that we solved with our library part stuff was our 2D symbol display for our objects, which I'm not going to go into that because that's a little bit more excitement, but you can actually change up the appearance of how your objects appear. And that's something we did solve. What we want to do is merge in a file. So let's bring in the one we saved today. Let's place there. So what we're doing is we're bringing in a SketchUp file into Archicad. See how it's geolocated because it was saved from that spot. Now, one thing we're going to see here, originally we saw our GDL object, and maybe let's, for fun, let's place our GDL object right beside it. I'll just grab that there, drop that, push that across. Apart from, I think there's a duplicate there. Now you can see all of the textures, even though it's come from a different template, have been retained. Okay. Now, how has this worked? So it's created a GDL object. We go into the settings for that GDL object. You'll see in this instance, there's no ability in here to actually change any of the textures. It's maintained its textures. So what has it done differently here that's enabled it to look right compared to this GDL object that we brought in? So let's go back into our libraries. And in your library manager, what you're going to see here is in your embedded library, it's brought in the textures from that project. So the methodology of creating an existing building using this SketchUp method to converting a a physical asset or a virtual asset, I mean, or an existing asset into something that you can bring between projects from projects past, with maintaining all of its, maintaining the way it looks, is to basically export this textures folder, and then you make sure that's part of your project library together with your new SketchUp item object that just turned into a GDL object. So that's one methodology that we adopted. And obviously in this instance, we brought in the site as well, but in other cases, you'd see that there'd be other buildings that are associated on this site, and you wouldn't actually turn the site into a as part of the model. All you do is would geographically reference and make sure that all your models are in the right spot relevant to 0, on your site. And that's how we place them there. And yep, I know it's good to hear, Scott, you guys are still using that. But we developed a really detailed workflow at Fulton Trotter so that we could bring the buildings in, but not only bring the buildings in, but then we had a methodology within the 2D scripting to actually display the floor plans, so that when you looked at ground floor and first floor, you could see how they sat down and represented next to one another. I don't know, is there anyone on the meeting that actually would see value in this and need to do this themselves? Yeah, so Ricky, basically what happens is, as I said, all those textures come in via they basically become part of your embedded library. So it's not the best place for them to live. And my approach is that once you get this saved into here, and I'll just let's just demonstrate it, right? So let's save this out, and we'll keep that as that. And let's save this out as well. And what we're going to do now is let's go out and delete this. And delete this out of here, because we don't want to have all these items kept in our embedded library. So what I'll do, and I'll do this in the background, you guys probably won't be able to exactly see it because I'm just going to do it up on my desktop. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder, and it will be called Building 1. And what I'll do is I'll drop the textures folder in there, and I'll drop in my GSM. All right, so then what I'm going to do now is we're going to see that that's disappeared. And what we'll do is we'll go into our libraries and objects and library manager. And in terms of best practice, what we're going to do is we're going to add a new, we're going to load a new folder, add a new library. Go to our desktop. And that building 1. So building 1, I end up putting that textures folder in there as well, okay? So let's load that library. And you can see here at the moment, there's warnings. So let's reapply that. And now we see it's come back with all of the textures. So the only trick to this, and the only stumbling block to this, is making sure that your naming conventions for your textures are consistent. Because what happens is if you have 2 rock 01s, for example, and they're different, then there'll be conflict. But yeah, so glad to hear someone got something out of that one. But to me, this works really, really well for trying to bring in context for projects that you've been working on for several different years, and your template's inevitably going to change. And what you need to be able to do is to be able to have the flexibility to move on and use your new template on your new projects, but not have any issues with the stuff that's old. But you want to be able to see it, you know, and even to the point of bringing that into Enscape, maintaining all of those things in there is what's going to make the difference. All right. So that's that one. Any questions at all regarding that workflow? The 2 GDL objects. So that's really interesting, right? So let's go into our library. And the really thing that's frustrating me at the moment is I have to reload the goodies back into my project. So this GDL house, details. The GDL house, which I just saved off, is 127 kilobytes. Let's go into our building 162. So vectorial fill, I predict not. Let's test that out. Normally what I've done with those existing buildings is just got them as for their outlines rather than actually being able to use them for that purpose of being able to have vectorial hatch on them. It'd be interesting to see whether or not it's done that. Probably not. Let's what's really bad is when you're going into a template that's not yours, and I'm taking this as the out of the box template. So I have no idea what the real settings are. And one of the things that's frustrated me with 26 is trying to get the right settings for vectorial hatching. So there's no vectorial hatching. Let's test this out actually and see whether or not it's smart enough to bring in the textures. Probably won't be. No. So that's one of the negatives right there. So that's probably the one failure point. But as I've said, for this workflow has been really, really specific for the way in which we've worked. Even that object didn't bring that stuff across. Although let's do a test. Go into this object and let's give this a material that we know will have some form of. Let's see if this does it. And it'll probably be the one material we can't see, right? Let's go in here and change a few. But it's an interesting limitation, right? So the reason we never got, I guess we never identified this as an issue is because we never really tried to do it for the purposes of our elevations. But you can see there obviously is a GDL object, apart from my brick building I've just built. That's one advantage of that method, if you actually have the ability to control it. But I guess the key thing is that what we've seen here today, hopefully for you, is two different workflows to bring in context. Now, the key thing to remember, and I found some really big challenges when I was testing this out, is you got to be really careful when you're doing this process. Don't go really crazy and bring in your full documented model unless you really need to. Only bring in what you really need to. If you bring in stuff that's in excess to what you really need, it just bogs down your model. So that's one of the things that were really I found really challenging. Like we can bring in another one. I think I've got another SketchUp file in here, or did I not put it in this folder? No, I didn't. There's another basically I tried to bring in, we've tried to bring in some bigger stuff in the past, and even trying to save off this file here as a 3D object, I encountered challenges and encountered problems. And because the libraries weren't loaded, the GDL object failed. I think maybe I might have kept this in here. I don't know. Let's see. No, I didn't. But yeah, you got to be careful not to bring in stuff that's not being seen, really. So yeah, so that's the kind of, I guess, a methodology you can use to bring in your external content from your previous projects that you've got on the same site. It just means that you have the flexibility then of being able to display it. And then I guess the key thing is if you've used a new template, the SketchUp approach might be right for you, making sure you're taking it out of that embedded library. For those that have got a reasonable template in place that they haven't changed too much and they don't mind doing a little bit of mapping, then maybe that approach with the GDL object might be more appropriate. Say, for example, if you want to have that flexibility of being able to see the textures in elevation. So that would be probably my suggestion. All right, so on to topic 2. Just run a quick poll and see what everyone's thoughts are and what they're doing with this, because the Francois, who's made the suggestion for this topic, actually isn't online. So it's interesting when people make the suggestion on a topic but then can't make it. All right, one person. Actually, it'd be really interesting. The person that is using it, it'd be great to have you turn your camera on and your mic, and let's have a chat about it. It'd be interesting to gain your thoughts on how you're going about it. Hey, Carl.
Hey, Nathan. On some projects, only not all. Mostly on projects where we have a BEP as part of a contract. I must admit, I struggle with this process. It's a lot of digits and stuff to get the hang of, but certainly once you've got it set up, it is good. It's a consistent method. Once you've got all your publishers set up to go with it, etc., then it can work really well. Well, I think the key thing we find is like this: you have this little diagram available for everyone to see all the time. So whenever they're trying to work out what they're looking at, they can look at the diagram and work out, oh, this means this, etc., etc., etc. Because if you just give people a lot of files like that, most people just don't have the slightest clue what they're looking at.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation then, because I've come up with I seriously, I sat down and did a workflow on it like 5 years ago, and when Francois reached out to me and said to me, oh, I'd like you to do a session on this, I had to dig back through my archives of testing to see if I could find the file that I used to get the outcome. Now, the problem is that the file that I did, I've lost it. So I've gone back. I tried to recreate the methodology I used last time, and I couldn't get it to work the way I wanted it to. So I've come up with a new method, and I'm really keen to obviously share this with everyone that's on the call. And then, Carl, and you can give me a critique to see how bad I'm at it, right? I'm really looking forward to that. But obviously there's a couple of people. Scott's also said on a very few projects, and Ricky says condensed version. So for those that aren't familiar, basically what I want to do first of all is talk about this as a standard in terms of just the container naming. So this is what's found this is all driven from PAS 1192. It is not part of the Australian New Zealand standard. It is in the UK version in their annex at the back of the standard. So right now, this actually isn't fully part of the new ISO standard. And the one here in Australia is, a lot of people are calling upon the old methodology from PAS 1192. So basically, every single container, a container these days is essentially a piece of information that becomes a deliverable. Okay, so it's not literally an overall container, but every single deliverable has to be named using this strategy. And it's not just for drawings, it's for reports, it's for estimates, it's for everything, single document that's handed over. Okay, so it's not just tied to the documents that come out of Archicad. So it's a very long-winded naming strategy, but what that means is that it means it should be able to be consistently used across more projects. And I have a little document set up in Notion to explain to me how I'm structuring my coded documents. Now, once again, you can choose to follow this yourself in terms of a process for naming your documents. But what you will find is that more and more, moving into the future, clients will stipulate how they want their files to be named. So there might need to be some adaptations that you'd need to make to how you're going about this. So the project name is between 2 to 6 characters in length. And the example from this is from the Scottish Futures Trust. is set up and advised by the client. So the client is always the appointing party at the top level of the project. The originator is the code that's given to you or your organization as part of that delivery. Okay. So once again, that's between 2 to 6 codes. Volumes. Now, volumes are set up and determined once again in the BEP. So the client will determine the volume naming strategy in terms of how they want this thing overall broken up. And a volume in some circumstances may be an individual building. So that code there can be applied. Level or location. So this is what's determined to determine the floor numbering. So once again, all of this information is kind of tied together so that your models, your PDFs, your DWGs, everything is all consistently named. Then we have a type, and this varies. So an ARCHICAD file would be an M3 file, which stands for model, a 3D virtual model. When we go into ARCHICAD, you'll see that this code has actually changed to a code called DR, which is for drawing. Then we have roles, and basically you have the overall role of the documentation in terms of whether it's architectural, structural, mechanical, electrical, etc. So they all have their own codes. And then we have a number which is essentially a sequential number that goes up. Okay. Now, ARCHICAD's really clever in the sense in the way in which you can number and use subsets to create, that's it, cool, to create your automated naming. And it'd be really interesting to hear from the guys that have tried to implement this internally, whether or not you've been very misbehaved in your approach to things and whether or not you've actually gone to custom naming over and above your methodologies of using the automated naming strategies from the layout book itself. So moving into the layout book, how good would it be if you could get the whole naming of your file for your layout sheet driven from this level? And for me, that would be an ideal outcome. Now, one of the tests that I did do 5-6 years ago was created a whole series of subset folders to drive the naming convention. So if I went up to my book settings and we start at the top here, and it would be Bimson, that, and I went Skew, and then I went XX because I only have one building on this project. Now, the problem we have here is that the code here that comes next is to do with volume. Now, the problem is that I've got a 3-story project. So level. Go back, just quickly jump back, go across. The joys of sharing screens. Actually, this will do. We'll start here and point at it, hopefully. So if we've got a single building, those 3 codes automatically can come from the top level of the book. We could potentially set up a different subfolder for each of our levels. This will change depending upon the output once again, which is a problem. That would be consistent, and this number needs to be sequential. So the challenges within the layout book process is to get this as a sequential number continuing through, whilst infilling the middle numbers or the middle identifiers is actually near impossible, and I can't find a way to do it. So the methodology that I've come up with, and I have to admit I've been really naughty in the sense that I haven't taken the time to get my hands on the latest UK Ireland layout book, or in the sense of what's in their template. So basically, I've cancelled out of that. And here's an example where we can see the naming convention sitting here, and then our suitability and revision sitting up here. Now, why have I made those manual? I'll get into that in a moment, but let's talk through how I've come up with this naming strategy through here and why, how this has turned out, and then what that means for not only the layout sheet, but also with the publishers, because that's the two things that's important. You want to be able to get your layout sheet to look right, but then you want it to publish as well. So the first experiment I did try is I actually went into my project information and I tried to place details of that project information into here. And the positive with this is that I can take this project information and use it as auto text on my layout sheet, which then drives the drawing number. Now, we want to take the next step. We'll go into here. Now, the problem with our organizer is if we want to, let's just go and try and rename this. If we go into our auto text, you'll see that we actually can't get any of the project information whatsoever. So automatically we can't create a custom name to appear on our layout sheet and then drive that naming convention through based upon our project information. So all of the information, sadly, needs to be driven by our layout information. So what I have done, and it's a sad thing to have had to have done this, but what I've done is in our book settings, I've come through and created custom layout info for every single one of the key items within the identifiers that are set up based upon ISO 19650 container naming. So what this has enabled me to do is each one of these items can be found and it can be called upon by our custom naming. And we also then get our sequential numbering that we need, that we can see down the bottom here, to comply with our requirements as well. Oh, Tony. This will be a whole lesson in ISO 19650. Before I move on to that, and I'll answer that one for you, the key thing with this approach is that I have my unique, I can go into basically to edit all of this and set this all up. What I've done is I've come into here and I've set up my layout management. So what I've done here is I've created all of these codes, and you can see here I was naughty and I missed an X, but it means that I can control all this information and set all this up. And then I use a drawn by and checked by in my traditional workflows. So in an ideal scenario, so that's how I've developed the naming strategy. These things are automated, and the other reason why you want to maintain all this automation and not have, and I've just created these folders here as subsettings and basically had them as a custom ID and just continue using the ID assignment of the upper levels so that the numbers will remain continuous. And the only reason I've got these folders here is so that a user that's working on the template or working in the project has somewhere to go to find those things. The biggest challenge we face is that people come in here, and because of the failure points of trying to get this thing to work, they'll come into here and they'll author the whole ID here as a custom ID, which is a danger because, say, for example, we want to introduce another plan into the equation and we want to go proposed site works. And we want to slot that into here. And then we want this to automatically, the publishing set, I've been very naughty with my publishing set. I haven't actually done it. So it's mirrored it, which I probably should have. And I probably should have created a folder at the top here. Now what's going to happen is I'm going to, because of my laziness here, we're going to drag this into here and we're going to see what happens, which is a problem. So let's just, if I was smart and I did it right, I would have created a folder at the top. It's a little bit cold here in Brisbane this morning. My fingers are a little bit cold. So what we want to do is drag that into there, and we'll drag all of these into here. Oh, I could try and drag them into there. get that one down at the bottom so we have them in the right order. Now, what I should have done is rename items from this level. And let's just copy this. Control C. Come up to here. Now I'm going to delete all that out. Control V. Now, for some reason, that's done all that. So let's just delete those out. Let's bring in all of our layout sheets, and I'll filter them by master. Under that folder, add the shortcut. Oddly enough, they haven't come in using that custom naming. I'm just going to paste it into there. That's another problem I need to probably talk. Wow, that's interesting. Okay. The reason why that's all gone in there is not because of my mistake. Guess what? I never actually put them into here. I created the actual layout sheet without providing all that data. So that's why that's odd. Got to make things a bit bigger, Nath, so you can see what you're doing. Now, the sad thing with this workflow is that it is a bit manual setting things up, but at the same time, one test I haven't done yet has been to kind of do a data export via Excel and see whether that actually can work. I have to actually be interested to see if it does that. External content, no, you can't because it's a project information, not a element information. Okay, now moving on to suitability and revision. Why have I put them in here rather than just using the actual true revision tool that we normally use? The challenge with the revision tool is the methodology in which the standard works. Now, what I'm going to do is I'll just get open this process. So I'll pull that up. Let's just share Notion with you. All right, hopefully everyone can see Notion up there now. And this is just me setting up my naming conventions. So if we go down to suitability and revision, the positive with ARCHICAD Revision Manager is that you can go through and change the revisioning naming to suit your workflows and processes. The problem that we have is that documents will go through different suitability classifications. And once it goes into the new suitability classification, basically what happens is that the revisioning starts from scratch again, which can be really painful for you because it's not going to just be P01 and then it's just going to continue through and then it's going to go through those stages. Essentially, the first time it becomes S1, which we'll explain in a bit more detail in a second, is how to basically, if we relied on this, basically we're kind of having to, you're going to have to do another trick, which I've used quite frequently, where you duplicate the whole layout book so then you can create new revisioning again. And it's a mess to try and do that. I'm yet to figure out anyone that would be able to do the revisioning based upon suitability classes every single time. So, yeah. So Jeff, can you do option properties to have those drop downs preloaded? No, you can't. Ricky, yes, the numbers did renumber. Yeah. But once again, I'm hoping this is occurring at a phase or a stage or something where you've got your task information delivery plan, you're still resolving it. And you would load that sheet into the right line in the layout book where it's relevant to you. And it might be that it might be worthwhile locking in a custom number, sequential number, possibly even once you have them locked in and you don't want them to change, possibly. So, so going back to Tony's question, specifically around suitability class. So once again, this is the UK's reading of the ISO standard, okay, in terms of how they work. So here in Australia, New Zealand, it may change and clients may use different approaches as well. But essentially, they have different phases, 4 different phases that they go through, which is typically work in progress, shared, approved, and then archived, okay, in terms of the way information goes through phases. And what will occur most of the time is that as an architect, as an engineer, you'll be working most of the time in S0, which is a work in progress document. That would live on your own local network, or sometimes, depending upon the project, there may be an expectation that S0 work is stored on the same common data environment, same server. But it means that it's not ready to be shared or used by anyone. S1 is the phase in which is the suitability classification that you give a container. So it could be a report, or it could be a model that you hand over and say it's suitable now for coordination. So therefore you can enable your engineers to know that it's time that's actually safe to be used, to be coordinated with. There's lots of arguments and debates as to whether or not a whole model should be S1, or whether or not each element needs to be actually classified as a suitability, because, you know, most models are always progressing and some things are resolved and some things aren't. Then we're also, like a report, for example, would be issued for suitable for information. S3 would be a suitability that you'd hand over to a client for review and comment, and then suitable for stage approval. So for example, your concept design phase, you'd issue off as an S4 once you knew that the client had been happy with those certain things. Moving into kind of the final handovers, you have those final handovers in S6 and 7. Then you can see they have other ones in place there for suitable for costing, suitable for tender, contractor design, manufacture, and procurement. Then there's the approval phase at the back end. So very convoluted. But the positive thing is, Tony, is that in a BIM execution plan, the team would respond to a client's exchange information requirements. So the exchange information requirements would explain what the expectations are of that appointing party, explain to you what they're expecting those suitability to be used for, if at all. So therefore you'd be advised for each individual project what that's supposed to be. So yeah, it's a very complicated process, but that is probably a very quick way in which I have set up a methodology of being able to get the naming. And sadly, yes, as we've talked through, the suitability and revisions, because of the limitations of Archicad, means that your revisioning you'd have to apply into here. And, you know, it'd be interesting, Carl, to hear your thoughts on whether or not you've tackled it a different way or not, so that there's less manual work, I guess.
I don't think we've come up with anything better than that, really. It's slight variations, but similar to you, relied a lot on using the folder naming, or the folders to control the naming conventions. Yeah. It's hard when you shift from XX, and I guess, are you using the folders to control the actual level naming conventions? I don't think we're using the folders to do that. I'm just trying to remember how we've got it set up, but it's a lot of similar things. But as you say, unfortunately, the Archicad system, not surprisingly, is not optimized to this. So either way, you're having to find fudges. There's those limits, as you say, like optimally that would all be in the project info box, so you could auto text from there, but you can't. Yep. So yeah, I think we're using very similar approach in most respects. Yeah.
And it's sad because I'd started back on that journey of I started to go back through trying to use folders to try and find the way I did it 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And then that wouldn't work the way I wanted it to. So then I thought, okay, well, I'll start to use project information to drive it. Then I went into the publishing set and gone, no, well, I can't access that information. So that all fell over. So the sad thing is the optimized way is to manually do all this sort of stuff, which is rather sad, to be honest with you. Yeah. Ricky's interested in others' uses with suitability status. This project would continually cycle through S0 to S. Yeah, it would. It does. Every phase should, because there's different sets of information that you're going to produce. The positive thing is with everything outside of Archicad in terms of reports, most reports or other handovers or budgets wouldn't continually cycle through it. the thing that cycles through it so much is all the models and ArchiCAD work that we're delivering. So the key thing to remember with this is that this isn't gospel, okay? So this is just a methodology to achieve kind of a deliverable against the standard itself in terms of the out-of-the-box standard from the UK. Clients that you have should be stipulating exactly how they want things to be named. So your individual clients may say deliver the project in accordance with ISO 19650, but if they then advise you as to the naming strategy of their containers and their revisioning strategy and suitability strategy, it may be different to this. So the key thing is remembering that this isn't the only way in which it's going to occur. A client's going to bring a variety of different solutions with them along the way. There'd be really good insights as well to gaining people's initial thoughts as well from, I guess, whoever attended the Building Together event last Thursday. Together with the Graphisoft have loaded this segment. It's a 35-minute segment up onto their YouTube channel. So you can actually watch and see what the new features of ArchiCAD 27 are. It's a different approach to their release strategy this year, which I've found interesting because we're in the first couple of weeks of beta testing. So it's very unusual that during the beta testing phase that they publicly announce what's in the software. And then for those that have an interest in having access to ArchiCAD before September, I strongly recommend that you go onto the Graphisoft website and register for the technology preview. So if you saw Sylvester talking about it as part of the Q&A and his presentation last week, you'll see that he did talk about registering for that technology preview, which then you should be able to, hopefully they'll be able to release access to that in the middle of July. So my thoughts would be is that you can use it to update your templates and the like. But be interesting to see in the comments, I guess, what people's thoughts were with this release. I'm actually pretty excited about it. There's some good things about it that I really like. There's stuff in it that I am on the fence with. But the key thing being is that in line with the roadmap that Graphisoft set out and released a few months ago, we are seeing what they're suggesting that they're going to put into the software actually come to fruition. So I'll just quickly go through this list. Design options, I think, for me, and seeing the amount of time that they put forward with that feature itself, that's the big selling item for ArchiCAD 27. I don't think it'll solve phasing, which is, I know, a workaround that a lot of people have been using the revision manager for. But I do believe that there's going to be some exciting workflows, I think, that we can see moving forward with that. The demonstration that was used in the Building Together event, where it was you're able to use the design options for your different room layouts. I think that's a really creative approach. You could see there that they were changing different, putting different unit fit outs into the buildings. So from my perspective, that'd be interesting to see how that ends up changing the way in which we work moving forward, in terms of at the moment we're seeing, the big kind of the stepped effect. Everyone's putting in different stories for every single room module and then placing it in. It'd be interesting to see how options can possibly change the way in which we do that. To me, I get excited by that. And it'll be interesting to see, the example I used with the high-rise building. I can imagine the challenges of trying to option up, 3 facades. I don't know if I could have the energy to do that. But I think, to me, that's Graphisoft are really excited about that development. I think that's a big winner. It's a big tick. It's been something that a lot of people have wanted. There are a lot of questions around the ability to try and be cheeky with it and seeing how we can kind of use it in other ways, in the similar approach to the way people have used a revision, renovation filters in the past. And it'd be really exciting to see some of the outcomes, I guess, once it gets into the hands of a lot of people, and what they're actually able to do with this in terms of, trying to find workflows. It's the same thing with like the SketchUp workflow that we developed a decade ago. It's like, what are the things that people are going to do with it? The distance guides, I don't know. For me, this one's an interesting one. I really think I'll have to actually use it in practice to see how exciting this is. For other people that kind of do work in that way and they were placing walls and doors, it might be something that's a real big value add in terms of speed. It's for me, it's probably a slight efficiency gain for some people working through with this new release. Attributes, the folders to the remaining attributes. You know, I've really found the folders a really interesting scenario. The reason I didn't start using favorites until folders came along, because it was just too hard to manage favorites overall. But I've actually found with attributes, I actually have no use for folders. And to me, I struggle with the idea of folders actually kind of get in my way of finding things, because of the naming strategies I have in place for all of my attributes are so well ordered and structured that I actually don't see any value in folders. Be really interesting to see whether or not Scott loves folders. Be really interesting to see how many other people are using folders. But there's another feature I've got on this list, which I'll talk about in a second, which I think might even mean that folders become redundant in many ways. Graphic overrides now. I don't know how many people are using extensive numbers of graphic overrides, but now they've kind of set up a grouping capability that are similar to Archicad properties. So the interface for graphic override rules now is similar to Archicad properties, so you can group them into groups. And I don't know how well that'll work. It could be something that could work, but I often find myself using different rules from different pieces of my graphic overrides into different things. So it'd be interesting to see how that grouping works. The potential folder killer, enhanced search. Graphisoft have claimed that they put this search functionality into 20 new areas within Archicad. So for me, you know, I've actually really found the search facility or search functionality in building materials and surfaces over the last year have meant I just type in the first few digits and bang, away we go straight in, and we hone in on that surface or building material without even needing the need for folders. So for me, the search functionality, I think, will be one for me that I'll really get excited about in terms of optimizing workflows and thinking of the practices that are working on even insanely large projects. I can imagine how much of a benefit this enhanced search will be. But what's going to be a challenge for people is for search to work really, really well is you need to have strict naming conventions, right? So it's going to kind of force people's hands to get the benefits of search. You're going to need to also then have really good naming conventions so people know what to type into the search in the first place. So visualization, FBX was reintroduced for import and export, and I think that's one that a lot of people have been crying out for. Personally, I don't need it. I don't need to export into FBX because I'm just using Enscape as my rendering engine, and then I'm using ModelPort to actually bring in content for any kind of internal fit out work that I've been doing. So, but there was this interesting scenario why they pulled it out a year or two ago. You know, it's good for those that are really kind of on that high end render scale or animation, which is it's good for a lot of people. For people that are on GDL, I don't know how many people are GDL coders or scripters that are on the call today, but I think that you'd be excited. I think with the new interface updates and the searching and the dark screen functionality. Scott, are you getting excited about that as a prospect moving forward from September this year? I think you might. It could go further. Yep, it always can. Just for the main purposes of obviously being up to date, I guess, is that the Graphisoft are going to be seeking to get their import certification for IFC 4 design review. I can't remember what the actual model view definition is that they're working with for that, but they do already have their export certification. But with Autodesk Revit, I think Revit have actually got both import and export right now. So it's essentially keeping it up to date with that. So that's a positive for collaboration. Interactive schedules. The interactive schedule updates, I kind of I don't get excited by, but I guess it's a start, right? We can do some background shading and column row coloring, and shifting a few columns. But I'm guessing that was something that a user requested that had a bit of pull. And I guess it's a little bit of a start, right? There's a lot of things that we'd really love to see happen in interactive schedules, and it's a start. BIMX and sun position shadows, man, how good is that? If you have your BIMX right now, I think it does work from memory right now. It's really good to actually be able to see, and for your clients as well, to see where the sun is going to hit on their houses or on their buildings when it's in use at certain times of the day. The key thing is getting this to work properly, is making sure that you have the correct geolocation put in place for your project. So make sure you do that in your project settings, that you've got your right latitude and longitude in place. Otherwise your sun will be inaccurate. And there's ones that too. So BIMX again, with regards to issues, they've got the teamwork connection. And, for most people that are working with small clients that are in individual projects, I don't like team working anything. I keep everything solo unless I'm working with a team of people, because the software is more stable as an individual file. But it'd be interesting to test and try out, because I did claim in the presentation that there's going to be BCF export as well for other file types. So I'm hoping that becomes an option for people that are using solo files, because we all know that when you're working with residential clients, how good would it be if they're communicating in BIMX and then shooting off a BCF file to you, so you can respond to that. At the moment, I use Airtable for my client requests or changes instead of emails. They go onto my Notion page, populate an Airtable form, and then it populates a database of client issues, and then we track each issue off as we resolve it. And the final thing was, with regards to BIMX, was consistency between their mobile, desktop, and web applications. So they're going to be upgrading a lot of their the features on their desktop and web interfaces to align with their mobile app. So how good would that be as well in terms of seeing how that all works? Obviously, you'll see from this list, the presentation was 34 minutes long. I've excluded at this moment in this conversation the structural and the MEP stuff. From my perspective, those areas aren't really of interest to me personally. They might be of interest to the DDS CAD customers. There's been a lot of kind of grizzles on the community platform about the focus on structure and services. I don't know how well you guys are well aware or not, but when Graphisoft brought in DDS CAD and DDS CAD was merged into Graphisoft, their whole team was brought across. So when you're looking at the roadmap and anything that's related to MEP stuff, the development of that side of the program isn't actually done by any of the existing ARCHICAD staff. It's been done by the DDS CAD development team. So don't ever think that that's been taking away the development of ARCHICAD. And also the structural stuff. I saw John is on here. Yeah, John, we've got to talk. I've got to spend some more time talking to the team about their structural side. But once again, they've got a team of people that are doing the structural stuff that's not actually impacting on the architecture. So I think I'm excited about this release. I think it's a good release. One of the other things that they don't talk about in the background, and I know that a lot of practices that only have a couple of licenses always question whether or not they should upgrade their software. Why do we pay each year and not see much happen? These features aren't relevant to us. One of the things that's really important in the background is that in the background, what they are doing is they do invest time in performance enhancements. They don't really talk about them that much because it's not really exciting and marketable. But each year, what's going on in the background is they are working on making sure the software performs fast. Every new feature they add on, you can imagine, could add extra load onto the computer. So they're going to make they're going to make efficiencies elsewhere. So the idea is that you want to be able to have the ability to get more speed out of your software. So that would be my one thing that keeps me going. When you have one poor release, you know that there'll be a reasonable one coming behind it. So in conclusion, that's closed that out. So how good is that? Any questions that anyone wants to ask while we're on the call to go through at all? Or is everyone having their coffees and they're ready to head back to their day? All right, guys, have a lovely Wednesday. I don't even know the day of the week at the moment, but have a lovely Wednesday, and we'll catch up again in a month's time.